And I'd like to keep this very conversational, so my students will find it's very unusual. I put the entire presentation on 10 slides, okay? So there's not a lot of slides. I really would like it to be very conversational, because as I subtitle here, it's just observations. My observations in running this program and tweaking the program as kind of the principal architect of the program, and making sure that the delivery in terms of the quality of the students is relevant in today's marketplace, and that it has a shelf life longer than a couple of years. We try to educate people for life, and we're really working on that.
So let me begin by surveying the audience just so I get a sense of how many people have been working in the field. And now, again, this is one of the things we're going to talk about tonight is how do we define the field? The field is many different things, and we'll talk about that over the course of the evening. But in this broader field of computer-human interaction, UI design, user experience design, how many have been working in the field 5 years or less? Let me see hands. Okay, well, so a lot of people reasonably know. 10 years less? Okay, 15? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to embarrass some of you. 20? All right, let's get down to the goodies. How about 25? Okay, more than 25? Yeah, it's the two of us. You live long enough, you can have some observations about what's happening in the field. And I just want to share that with you in terms of my experience coming into the field in the early 80s and what I've experienced over that time, and some projections about what's moving forward. And to share with you some early findings over the last couple of years. And one of the things that I do, and it's absolutely critical in program management, is to be in constant contact with employers, hiring managers. In emerging industries and what we would call progressive industries, for some of the hot, sexy companies that people want to be employed by today, I'm in contact with them on a regular basis to see what they're looking for in terms of knowledge, skill sets, personal qualities, and the soft skills that I'll talk to you about a little bit later on. So I've surveyed probably about 200 companies now over the last 2 years through a series of interviews. And I'll share some of that with you in a very concise form, but I hope what it will do is generate a lot of discussion. So I think there should be a lot of discussion and debate around this. Again, these are my observations. There's no right answer here. So they all seem to be delivered very late, so I don't know the exact date of it, but it was the one that actually arrived at my doorstep back in August, and there was an article in there on reimagining HCI. And I struck by the parallel to what we're talking about this evening, and what I'm constantly dealing with in terms of monitoring the changes in the field. And I love this quote that comes from a designer, an HCI designer, interaction designer at Nokia. Because it describes, I think, a lot of what I'm talking about tonight. In the early days, HCI people were told, please evaluate our interface and make it easy to use. Many of you lived through that period. That gave way to please help us design the user interface so that it is easy to use. That in turn led to a request, please help us find what the users really need so we know how to design the user interface. And now, and this is really where we are today, and I think this is what's so exciting about where we are right now, the engineers are pleading with us to look at this area of life and find us something interesting. And I think that has so many exciting possibilities, and that's where we'll end here tonight. I think there's never been a more exciting time to be in this field. I really envy young people starting out in this field. For those of you who've been in the field for 25, 30 years, you realize the first 10, 15 years were a lot of fun. You felt like you're banging your head against the wall and not making a lot of progress. Today we really do make a difference. So it really is an exciting time, and I think we do owe a lot to people who've been in the field for a long time. Chauncey's not here tonight, right? No? But people like Chauncey and others who have been there pounding away for decades, really spreading the good word. I think that's what's changed things, is that we've been relentless and we've just been marching forward very, very slowly. But I think the pace today, and I think that it's exciting, it's exhilarating. I think it's a little anxiety producing as well, the pace of change that we are experiencing today. So as you're managing your career, and we'll talk about that, how do you manage your career? It's a lot more difficult today because things are constantly changing as we move along. Now, this quote I think does it very nicely, but this is a graphic that anybody who's ever taken a class with me in the certificate program or the graduate program has seen. And it's one that all of my clients see as well, as I'm trying to take somebody who's been, in the industry for a long period of time, competing in the industry, and grew up in the industry in a different time back in the late 80s or the early 90s, how the marketplace for technology products have changed. Again, back, and I'm not going to go through all of this in great detail, although I'd be happy to explore anything you would like, but back in the 80s, it was all about engineering. It was all about technology. We defined ourselves in the marketplace. We differentiated ourselves in the marketplace based on technology and technology alone. Now, those of us who worked in usability back in the 80s, we kept saying, there's a better way, we can make it more usable, and so on and so forth, and we were screaming, we were very passionate about that. But now in hindsight, I look back and I said, we were wrong. We were really kind of ahead of the marketplace. And what I've learned, if I've learned anything over 27 years in this field, is it's ultimately going to be determined by the marketplace. And you can't rush the marketplace. Now, the marketplace is moving very rapidly today. Back in the 80s and the early 90s, it wasn't moving very, very quickly at all. But back in the 80s, you did compete by power, speed, reliability, just heaping features upon features on release after release after release. That's how we created value in the product. That's how we justified a new release. And that's how we sustained the business. For the IT side of the world, for what IT existed back at that point in time, we were really looking at internally driven business processes. It was the business processes and the business rules that really governed what we saw in the IT applications at that time. And not a lot of focus on the people who actually had to interact with those processes. And then it was all about external support apparatus. That's the only thing that I would add to that quote from the Interactions Journal. I remember a time when we weren't even allowed to make the products more usable. I was hired by clients to come in because they were having problems with the product, but they would say, don't touch the product. The only way I could affect positive change would be working with documentation, and I know a lot of you came out of documentation world here, but I could improve the effectiveness and the usability of documentation, training, and support, what I call the external support apparatus. And I think that was one of the major changes as we went from the 80s into the 90s, is we went from that heavy reliance on external support to slowly over time embedding that support into the product design. And with that, our value increased significantly. Our involvement in product design, where we could actually affect the design of the product in a positive way, began to change and change rather dramatically. So I'm not minimizing, and I always have to be clear here, is I'm not minimizing the importance of technology. It always begins. Notice there's always a plus sign. This is where competition begins, is with good technology. This is where the competition begins, always innovating and coming up with new technologies. But it doesn't end there, and it can't end there. And if you do end there, you have that competitive advantage, but for a very small period of time. Ultimately, your competitors catch up with you a lot quicker today, and that's a change in the marketplace. You have to deliver that same technology in a more usable form, and you need to be focusing on usefulness. So that's something that, again, we started to see a distinction occur in the 90s, and again, this is part of the evolution of the field. A distinction being made between usability and usefulness. Usefulness focusing on the value. So Alan Cooper's no concept of goal-driven design that he was pushing back in the mid-90s, a lot of people were talking about at the time, but really focusing on what people value, what people's goals are, and interacting with the technology. And if you focus on that, you will have a successful system. But here, again, a laundry list of things that we were looking at, things like ease of learning, intuitiveness, transfer of learning is so critical. And we know that's a real demand in the marketplace, is that we can transfer learning across products, that we can transfer some learning from one release of the product to the next release of the product. And you know what? It doesn't matter whether we're talking about software. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about an internet service. It doesn't matter if we're talking about consumer electronics. Humans are wired to transfer learning, to apply what they've already learned to new experiences. So the degree to which we can manage that, and this is where it becomes an art, the degree to which we can, again, leverage some of that existing learning that's already been invested in the product, but not allow that to hold us back from innovating. And that's the art. Okay, is if you strike the balance between innovating, which suggests something new, but you build on what people already know and allow them to leverage some of that learning. Goal-driven design. Market segmentation becomes so much more important. And what I'm finding here, and this is, again, part of that changing face of the field, is the market slices are getting finer and finer and finer. I mean, our personas and our user profiles were pretty large and huge buckets where we put big groups of people in. As the marketplace becomes more demanding, more competitive, we find we're slicing that market thinner and thinner and thinner. And that means we're becoming a much more research-based field. It means we're working much more closely with marketing and marketing data in order to formulate that segmentation in meaningful ways. And again, focusing on value and focusing on meaning of those market segments, not just doing it for the sake of segmentation. And then again, familiar to people in HCI, but again, what does this field mean? Again, there was a traditional view of what HCI was, and I think there was an expectation that people would go through and have a certain academic credential, which would involve very deep study of human behavior. But I do find in the field today that there are a lot of people that are just kind of, and I don't mean this in an offensive way, but just kind of snuck in the door. And they classify and they affiliate themselves with the field and the profession, but they have varying degrees of that deep understanding of human behavior. But what I do find is, and what I do find in the marketplace is, as the marketplace becomes more demanding, more competitive, as it becomes more difficult to differentiate yourself in the marketplace, you need to have a deeper and deeper understanding of user behavior. And I look at it and say, okay, I've been in this field for 27 years. I spent 12 long years in graduate school before then. I still tell my students I'm a student of this, okay? I'm constantly studying. I'm a nerd. I'm always reading a book on some aspect of psychology or interaction behavior on the beach when everybody else is reading novels. It's never done. It'll never be done. You always have to consider yourself a student of this. And again, you're just looking at different aspects of human behavior that you feel is relevant today, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on and how I make those kinds of decisions. And so where we are today, this is where I kind of see the leading edge of the field. This notion of enriching people's lives, okay? And actually, I heard this the other day on NPR when somebody was asking about Steve Jobs' greatest contribution, and they actually said that. They said he enriched people's lives, and that's why people are so passionate about the products. And to think that we can do this, and again, I think back 27 years, I was just trying to make a widget so it was more usable and more intuitive. You've gone from that to enriching people's lives. That's quite a journey. That's quite a journey. And I'll tell you, this is a hell of a lot more fun than making a widget usable. Not to minimize the importance of usable widgets. We still have to do that. Again, we can never forget the foundation. You just can't leap ahead. So I'll get clients that will call me, and they still have like buggy software that's not usable. And they'll say, we've made user experience job one. And I said, well, no, you got to go back and you got to go through this whole thing. You got to go through the whole life cycle, this whole evolution. You got to make sure you have a stable product, good technology, deal with the basic low-hanging fruit of usability, that you're focusing on value and usefulness, and then and only then can you get to these higher levels of user experience. Simplicity is a big one, and this is a game changer. And I'll have a whole list of game changers a little bit later on, but this is a game changer. People like John Mader have been talking about this for years from the Media Lab, and now down at RISD, his laws of simplicity is a nice way of capturing it. But he's been talking about this. Our lives have become too complex. And I think most of us experience this. We're on all the time, okay? And we only have so much to give as humans. And so that's frightening people in the marketplace, producers of products and services, because they realize when we reach capacity, we're no longer buying. We're no longer going to grow the market, okay? We're no longer going to grow revenues. It's going to end. It's going to start to plateau. So we have to look back and say, okay, how can we simplify people's lives? How can we go back and look at the technologies that have invaded every aspect of our lives? How can we make those technologies more usable, more transparent, and then free up the resource that's being dedicated to those products unnecessarily, free that up so we can buy more and use more, okay? And it doesn't have to always be buying and consumerism and all of that, so I don't want to be on that push necessarily. But again, that we can use more and be engaged in more. But there is a finite capacity. So a competitive advantage moving forward is going to be building simple designs that deliver great value. It doesn't mean they're not going to do complicated things, wonderful things, marvelous things. Yes, we're going to expect that. But it's going to do it in a far more transparent, simpler version, okay? And again, you're all familiar with Donald Norman, and Donald Norman talked about this in the late 90s in his book, The Invisible Computer. He was on to this. He was talking about the notion that the computer needs to go away. And again, I think we can expand this and say invisible technology. Technology needs to deliver the value, but get out of our way. It needs to do it in a fashion where it's not in our face, okay? Now, there's going to be certain technologies, particularly in consumer electronics, where there's probably a greater tolerance and actually maybe a need for it to be a closer, more intimate interaction. But for a lot of the technology, it just needs to go away. It's occupying far too much of our lives. Multimodal. It's finally arrived, okay? It's finally arrived. They've been talking about this, at CHI conferences, back in the, early to mid-90s about multimodal interface design and interaction and how it's no longer going to be limited to the keyboard and the mouse and so on and so forth. And we're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and it's here. It's here. And there's no turning back. And these expectations are being, formed in the minds of infants today. I'm sure you've all seen the YouTube videos of the little infants, and I've had so many people tell me these stories of infants who are going up to a still photograph and doing this, trying to enlarge it, okay? Because that behavior has been implanted in their little 18-month-old brain. And again, these behaviors, or I watch, my 14-year-old, interacting with his games, no more controls with the Kinect and things like that, or even with the Wii. I can't imagine him sitting down in a cubicle for 8 hours a day with his hands on the keyboard and the other one on a mouse. It ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. Now, I don't think we're going to be dancing around the cubicle either. But we're going to have to figure out somewhere in between. The expectations of tomorrow's marketplace is being formed today by games and mobile technology and social media and the like. And we need to be focusing our attention on that. And we need to imagine what are the possibilities moving forward. And not just for games and Facebook, but what are the implications of that for the products that we use in the workplace, okay? In government and so on and so forth. And again, I think in the old days, we used to always draw these kind of hard, fast boundaries saying, well, that's work, that's fun, this is transportation, this is something else, and keep everything in a nice, neat little compartment. And don't cross those boundaries. That's not the way it works today. And I think that's another very big change that we need to face. I think expectations are being formed and people are saying, hey, it works in the world of Warcraft. Why can't it work in the workplace in this collaborative design system that I'm using that's a dog? Okay, and I see this, and I work with these systems where, I watch my 14-year-old conquering the world with people that he's assembling around the globe with no problem at all, and yet I look at the software I use here at the university that's unusable. And you have to wonder why. Okay, what lessons can we learn from all of that? Innovation's a big one. And I'll tell you my own story. In a few weeks I'm teaching a course on task analysis. This is a course I've taught from the very beginning. And I've always told the story in teaching the task analysis class. I've never performed a task analysis where I haven't discovered something of tremendous, unexpected value. And that was always wonderful. I always referred to it as the golden nugget that I would deliver unexpectedly to a client, where they expecting that they were going to get this, and I would give them something really new and innovative possibility. And I never called it that. I never called it innovation because I'm saying, I'm an HCI guy. I'm a usability guy. I'm not an innovator guy. And I never defined myself as doing that. But I have to tell you, and I'm not afraid to put the stake in the ground right now, we are perfectly positioned to be innovators. We are there on the front line in contact with the user community, with the marketplace. We're identifying what they value, what's missing in their lives. Why shouldn't we be the one that delivers more than just the information and the data? Why can't we be delivering the innovative solution? Okay? I think this is going to be, you know, kind of the next frontier in the field, is thinking that way, of thinking we're not just going to be improving usability and usefulness, but we're also going to be innovating the product. And this is hot in the world today, as you know, this notion of continuous innovation. And this is the difference between what I would call old tech, and I won't name companies in case some of you work for them, but you know what old tech is, versus new tech. You know, old tech thought of innovating over years and years and years, and innovation to them was just heaping more functionality onto the same product. Okay? You go to a place like Facebook today, and they know they're obsolete today, even though they're so incredibly successful. The mindset in that company is we're obsolete. And we need to be in the next place tomorrow. And they don't define themselves by today's technology, and that was a mistake that we made in the past. We defined ourselves by the technology the company produced. And usually the technology the company produced initially. New companies and new tech today is they're not defining themselves by the technology, but they're defining themselves by the value they deliver and the experience. And they expect that it's going to be a new technology that's going to deliver that value and experience, you know, 2 years or 5 years from now, and they're looking for that innovation. And again, we need to adjust our thinking. Again, we kind of many of us grew up in this way here of incremental improvements. And you really can't call that innovation. It was slow, incremental improvements. And at the end of the day, you know what we ended up with is just huge, bloated products, okay? And again, that can't go on forever. And we see so many companies that die or struggle because of that. They end up with these big, bloated products, and they can't get out of it. They absolutely can't get out of their way. Transparency, the notion of the invisible computer. The emotional part of the design, this is not new to HCI, but the emotional part of HCI, the notion of delight, pleasure, trust, beauty. Hard to sell that in today's economy unless you're in certain industry sectors, okay? But there's no doubt, and I do hope the economy improves, and I'm hopeful that it will. But when it does improve, these things are going to become very important again. Okay? Again, getting very, very deep and intimate understanding of what drives these things. And can we drive these things through the interaction with the product and the experience? Service sciences. Again, capturing a bigger swath. This is a big change in the field. Again, we're not just in technology anymore. I work with every imaginable kinds of companies. I mean, from toy manufacturers, plumbing fixture manufacturers. I've done the bathroom experience, where I apply, principles more from human factors and ergonomics, but apply that to the experience that you have with, the feel of the faucet, the touch of the water, the pressure points on the body, the sound of the water. Is it pleasing? Is it pleasurable? So on and so forth. The very same kinds of analysis that we would do in, interaction with technology, you can do to a range of products. I've done work with the National American Library Association. I'm talking about the library experience, okay? Because here's a field that's really questioning their very existence. Are they relevant in today's world? And they realize the experience that people have had with libraries over their lifetime, okay, no longer works today. If they continue down that same path, they are obsolete. But again, I give them a lot of credit. They're really thinking about they call it the patron experience. And they're thinking about that, and they're thinking about it in the bricks and mortar, and they're thinking about it, how it works electronically and digitally as well. And again, they're thinking about this. And this is a big change in the field, is that we're way beyond technology. Now, a lot of this is enabled and entangled in technology, but we're talking about something bigger. And again, this emerging field of service sciences, it always bothers me when you see these things creeping up on the outside. And I was watching this, about 5 years ago when I first started reading about service sciences. I'm going like, that's what we do. We just don't call it that, but we do that. I mean, we can analyze a process and a service, and again, from a behavioral perspective, we can apply our same techniques to improving that product or service. So when I sell this now, whether it be at the graduate program or what I do in my consulting, I talk about, I improve products and services, okay? And the degree to which they're entangled, we will do both of them. all touch points with the customer. And again, my good friends here at Staples, I know you guys do this, and you talk about every touch point with the customer. It could be invoices, it could be shipping, it can be ordering. And again, this is what Apple does so brilliantly, is they carefully orchestrate the entire experience, from their advertising and marketing to their stores, to iTunes, to the product, to the software. That's not by accident, as you all know in this field, okay? That is a very, very carefully coordinated and controlled activity. That does not happen without a lot of effort. And nobody has mastered it to the same degree that they have. But that's the way we need to think about our field today, is not just the experience they're having with the technology, but every touch point within the organization. And can you orchestrate the experience at that level? And you can. And then finally, metrics. So the good news is this is all very positive. I mean, the opportunities are tremendous for us today. Now, with that comes responsibilities. I would say, I think back in the 80s and the 90s, we got away with murder. I mean, we would do our thing. We would charge a lot of money or be paid a lot of money. And we would look at it and say, hey, looks more usable to me. What do you think? And then, yeah, it looks better, huh? And that was sort of the metric. That was the measurement. And yeah, we would do some usability tests, and maybe not really carefully designed usability tests with really good data analysis and so on and so forth. But we would produce data and we'd say, yeah, it's better. We have to be held to a much higher standard today. And I think that with success comes responsibility. And with that responsibility comes measurement and metrics and accountability. And so we really have to improve. That's an area where there's a lot of room for improvement. I've been threatening my students with this. Probably next year we're going to be requiring statistics. I'm seeing this in the most progressive companies today. They require people in this field to have a quantitative background. And so we're going to see that marching forward. And that all comes with, again, we're out of engineering and development. We're higher up in the organization, and we have to play by their rules and their games. So this is sort of the evolution of how it's marched along. Would anybody want to challenge, disagree, debate any of that? I love a fight at this time of night. Go ahead.
I just want to know when the 80s ended because of life. 96 or so?
And some people it hasn't. No, the question is a very good one, and I apologize because I usually mention it, but the question's an excellent one. When did the 80s end? And it didn't end for some companies. And you can almost say for some companies, everybody's competing in a different place. And so when I'm doing strategic advising to clients, the secret is to know where you need to be to compete today. And so some people are competing very, very effectively today, back somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. And if you can compete and differentiate yourself in your market sector there, then that's exactly where you should be. Just realize you're marching forward. You're never going backwards, you're never standing still. You're always marching forward. And in certain industries, like if you're in internet services and social media, you're racing. You're not just marching, you're racing. And some people are crawling. If you're standing still, you're dead. That's the one thing you need to know. So you don't have to be down here. Not everybody, and it's wrong. I see some people down here making this big investment, and they don't need to do that. And this is the business side of it. That requires a huge investment. And you may not be able to get that return on your investment in terms of the pricing of the product. And this was the mistake that Apple made back in the 80s and the early 90s, is they were making a product that was too good for the marketplace. And it was priced accordingly. And you know what? The market said, we didn't want it. Some of you remember that. There was a time in the early 90s when Apple was going out of business. Okay? And it's because they were turning out technology that was too good for the market and priced accordingly, and the marketplace refused it. And there were other things, of course, as well. But that was one of the big mistakes. Donald Norman was asked at the time, he was an Apple fellow at the time, he was asked, what was the biggest problem at Apple? And he said they didn't know when good enough was good enough. And we can learn a lot from that, and that's still true today. So your question is a very good one, but I don't want to leave the impression that everybody needs to be down here. All right? Others, there was another hand, wasn't there? No? I'm imagining things? Okay, good. So, I'm still tinkering with this. This is my reduction of about 250 pages of notes that I've taken in my interviews with employers. I'm trying to bring it down to that something that really classifies what people are looking for today in employees that are going to be successful and valued within the organization. They want people who have knowledge, so it begins there. And so this is a very traditional approach to HCI, is that we build a traditional knowledge of HCI accommodating an expanding view of the profession. What's the expanding view? New technology, new means of interaction, mobile, what does mobile mean to us? What does social mean to us? New user populations. Again, when I was in grad school, we were not talking about universal accessibility. We talked a little bit about localization, perhaps. We didn't talk about people with cognitive disabilities. We didn't talk about illiterate populations and so on and so forth. Our user community today is the world. And so we have to study that. And again, back then we were not studying designing technology for the elderly because we just expected the elderly to go off quietly and die. But now they're living and they're using technology well into their 90s. And again, we study that now. So again, there's an expanding role there, but that hasn't changed. I think we really define ourselves in this field by that deep knowledge. And that deep knowledge is not easily acquired, as every one of my students will tell you. It's not easily acquired. And you will spend a lifetime doing this if you do it right. It never ends. So on the knowledge, you realize that only takes you so far in terms of looking at a problem and framing a problem and coming up with a solution. So on to that, you have to deal with the contextual, it depends kind of variables that comes with every problem. And so here we need to look for additional evidence that will complement that and give us a more complete picture. So now here we're talking about research methods that supplement the core knowledge, okay, that fill in the missing pieces that are very contextually driven. Now again, what I hear from employers all the time is, okay, really bright person, really good with the research methods, knows everything, ethnography, interviewing, focus groups, surveys, and all of that. But they're not worth a dime when it comes to data analysis, okay? So the ability to analyze the data, and not just to analyze and crunch the numbers, but to gain insights. That's the word that just kept bubbling up in my content analysis over and over again. I'm looking for somebody that can gain insights from the data, all right? Now, that's not enough, because again, I heard a lot of complaints about, again, a lot of you are familiar with the concept of design thinking and some of the design schools that are out there, the D schools out there that promote design thinking. And I'm hearing a lot of backlash against that. And again, I don't think it's all warranted, but what I hear repeatedly is enough with design thinking, what I want is design doing, okay? Too much thinking, particularly at the pace at which the marketplace is moving today. So they want people that can go from insight to innovation to implementation. They want somebody to go from the insight to at least framing what it might look like. We'll talk about in a few moments about what's the role of design and all of this, high-level design. There's a lot of debate over that, and we'll talk about that separately. And then that's not enough. And again, particularly in the most progressive, fast-moving fields like internet-based services, so that these would be your eBays and your Googles and your Facebooks and your Twitters and LinkedIn's of the world. They're moving at lightning speed. Is they talking about continuous innovation, okay, constant renewal? Is how do we sustain innovation? Again, the attitude, and I see this in a lot of these progressive, companies that are beyond startups, but even, companies that are coming along and following that are startups, is they know they're obsolete the moment they launch or they implement, okay? And they have this attitude. And that's very different than, again, 10, 15 years ago, where we would launch a product and we would ride it for everything it was worth. And then we would take it another 3 years further beyond its life expectancy. We just squeezed it for everything it was worth. It's a very different world in new tech today, okay? And again, you have to really adjust your thinking. And I have to watch it, because I work with clients in old tech, and I have students from old tech, and I have students and clients in new tech. And I have to really just adjust my thinking when I walk through the doors. They think differently. They behave differently. It's a very different culture, and you have to adapt. So again, knowledge, evidence, insight, innovation, implementation, and then renewal, okay? Questions about any of that?
Does all of this happen in one person?
This is a good question. This is the big debate. I'm going to ask you to hold this because it can exist in one person, but there's not a lot of them. There's not a lot of them, and I think that's a real problem, and I think those of you, who are students of mine, it's something we talk about a lot, because you'll read these job descriptions where they're asking for all of this, and you're going like, I'm missing something. I'm missing a lot. I'm missing one piece of the puzzle, two pieces of the puzzle. They can't expect this from everybody. But I think from knowledge to evidence to insight to innovation to implementation, I said create and perhaps deliver. That's where it begins to break off. I think, again, we'll talk in a moment about this notion of ideation. I think everybody in our field needs to go from insight to ideation, that we can do a visual representation, that we can do some kind of mock-up of the idea that we can turn over to an industrial designer or to a high-end visual designer. But we need to be able to take it beyond words and numbers, and we need to create some kind of rough image. I think we all need to be able to do that. I do believe that, okay, to be true. Anybody else challenging any of this? So and again, these things just came up over and over again in the interviews. And again, some companies are looking for all of this. I think most of them are looking through it right up through this notion of innovation and implementation, at least early implementation. I think most companies are there. So some different perspectives in terms in the field as well. And again, move this quickly, but this notion of, again, looking at the value that we bring in terms of looking at development resources. This is kind of old school, but you know what? I'm not willing to let this go. There is no industry in the history of the world that is as wasteful as our industry. And we just accepted it. And I've just seen this for so long, and I'm just now just sitting here saying enough is enough, okay? And we always hide behind, well, that's tech development, and it's that way, and there's always going to be scrapping, there's always going to be failures, and there's always going to be products that don't launch. And I have to say, geez, but does it have to be as significant as it is today? Does it have to be as large as it is today? And I would argue why we see such a high failure rate and high waste rate in our industry is because we're developing and designing without knowing. And that's the business we're in. We are in the business of knowing, of putting our clients and our companies in a place where they can succeed. And that's how we have to define our value. And we have to communicate that about ourselves and our role in that area in the company. Because we often hear, again, still, we don't have the money to do this. And I just keep coming back, and I don't hesitate. I say, hey, you got the money to do it wrong, okay? And it's a lot cheaper to do it right, okay? And I don't hesitate just to deliver that message bluntly. Brand. This is interesting where I'm seeing some of my students now picking up, for their electives, they're actually taking courses in consumer behavior because they're actually looking at what are the buying behaviors, not just use behaviors, but what are the purchase behaviors. And the research is showing that they're two entirely different things, and they're not compatible. So again, this is where product design becomes an art form, is because, you got this one behavior over here that's driven by certain requirements that are actually going to compromise the long-term satisfaction and use with the product long-term. That's not a good place to be. So it's an art to say, okay, how do I deliver enough to sell it, but also to make sure that they're going to be satisfied long-term so that they are loyal and passionate about the product. And they come back and buy it time and time again. Everybody wants to be, and again, it's tough to just keep using the Apple example over and over again, but I hear it all the time. Why can't I be Apple where, my clients and my customers are lined up around the block, for days waiting to buy the product when they know, it's going to have some problems and it's going to be more expensive and the price is going to come down and it's going to be followed rapidly by another release. And how do you generate that kind of passion? Okay? It's doing a lot of the things that we're talking about here today. And so what happens when the user experience becomes the brand? And we see that in so many areas where the key differentiator from a business perspective, when you cross that line that you're no longer competing on technology alone. Technology is no longer your differentiator. And I see this in so many businesses. I see it in healthcare, I see it in financial services as well, is where, healthcare and financial services have become a commodity in the United States. And once you become commoditized, how do you compete? Lower prices? That can only go on for so long. That's not sustainable. What you can do is deliver a better customer experience, a better user experience. That is sustainable. That can be made better and better and better, okay? And actually with that comes value where you can increase the price of the product, hopefully. So understanding this notion of competitive differentiation, I hear this all the time. Again, this is what keeps CEOs awake at night, is how do I differentiate myself in increasingly competitive markets? And I talk to a lot of people where they'll say, my market is hyper-competitive, okay? And I'm a commodity. So how do you compete as a commodity in a hyper-competitive environment? The only opportunity you have is experience, okay? And a very sophisticated, deep, intimate experience. Again, that delivers value and enriches people's lives. Marty Kagan talks about this in his book, Inspired. Where he talks about doing the opportunity assessment. And Marty was a lead product manager at eBay, and one of the best product managers out there. And he's doing it strictly from a product management perspective, and this is something we'll talk about in a moment, is product management now, the field of product management is all over user experience. We're going to have a lot of people encroaching on our turf. So again, that's why I'm putting these stakes in the ground. I'm kind of laying out the turf here, and I'm willing to defend it. Because marketing is coming at us from one side, and product management is coming at us from the other side. All right? And we'll talk more about that in a moment. This notion of continuous innovation, new offerings and services, is never to sit back and rest on your laurels and your successes. Is you realize that that's going to be very short-lived. Is that you have to be looking for the next great thing. You know, and I love it when I see these commercials on television, you know, like the HTC commercials. In the end, innovation doesn't matter unless it does something that really matters to you. You see this in their commercials. You see this in the Cadillac commercials. There's so many commercials, Bank of America, that are really talking about user experience in their commercials. We didn't see that 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Our time has arrived. Our time has arrived. And again, we need to make sure that we live up to those expectations and deliver. So what are the game changers? I've named a lot of them. And what's a game changer? It's something that changes the expectation in the marketplace. I'm always looking for these. I've always been looking for these. I mean, going back in the early 90s, there wasn't video games and things like that, but I was studying kids playing with little Legos, the little plastic things, in the usability lab. Because I was looking to see, okay, what was an important thing in these children's lives that was actually shaping their expectations of how they interacted with the world? I was looking for anything, and Legos were very popular at the time. And then it was video games, and now I'm watching social media and games and collaborative games and so on and so forth, massively collaborative games. Mobile's a game changer. And then this is where I'll start talking about differences. So naturally, the two big markets for people in our field are here in the Northeast, and then California, and particularly in the Valley, in the Bay Area. And so most of the jobs are there that I was looking at in those two areas. And then there does seem to be a cultural divide. There's a much higher impact, a much more significant impact of mobile in California, in the Valley. That's all they talk about is mobile. Mobile has turned their world upside down. Now, some of you are experiencing that as well here. But that's all everybody was talking about. And as a result, you see actually there was a higher demand for technical skills. Because one, it's a very fast-moving market, and the technical requirements are very, very particular, depending on the device, the carrier, and so on and so forth. And if you don't take that into account in interaction design, you're in trouble. So it actually is, I think near term, it's increasing a demand for technical skills again in that market. That's going to be short-lived because we're going to see convergence and we're going to see the emergence of standards. The marketplace will not tolerate this for long. But near term, you're going to see this. So that's how you read some of the things that you're seeing in job ads today. Social media. What's going on in social media? And what can we learn from that? How is it affecting, and again, I watch them like my teenagers, where at first, I'm sitting down trying to explain to them privacy, and now I realize, 5 years later, they have different rules of privacy. Okay, privacy is not universal; it's not fixed, so on and so forth. They have a totally different set of rules in terms of what is private, what is secure, what are my expectations for security, so on and so forth. And a lot of that has been driven with their experience in social media. Okay. So how is that shaping and changing their expectations that they're going to bring to the market? And don't say, well, that's Facebook and it has nothing to do with me, or that's games and it has nothing to do with me, or that's a micro app on a Droid device, it has nothing to do with me. No, it's changing their expectations. And they don't keep those expectations in neat little boxes. They're going to transfer them. And they do that more and more often today than ever before. Games, big time. Okay, particularly the collaborative games. Again, we can learn so much. Again, I don't mean that our applications should become silly or game-like, but boy, we can learn a lot about collaboration. We can learn a lot about embedded support, okay, from the world of games. Micro apps. Again, this is pushing that notion of minimal design. As again, we're saying like, here's a tiny little thing that's very simple, delivers very focused value, it is priced accordingly, and I love it. And again, I think we've been schooled that everything is big and all-inclusive and bloated, and I pay for the whole frickin' thing, and I only use 10% of it. And we accepted that for decades. That's changing. The whole business model that old tech was built on is going to be challenged. That you have to buy the whole thing, even though you're going to use it, just a small percentage of it. And again, the notion of micro apps are changing that. They're changing that expectation that you can buy pieces and have them priced accordingly, and you can use 100% of it. Minimal design and the lean startup. Okay, minimal design, there's slightly different versions. Minimal design is usually a part of the lean startup. But many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the lean startup concept. It's something I'm hearing a lot. And it's not just being used in startups, but it's being used in larger development organizations to kind of retool and refocus. But it's this notion of not creating a fully developed, fully refined product before releasing it to the marketplace. It's defining that first minimal design that's going to make people happy, that's going to get a foothold in the marketplace on which you're going to build success. And then you slowly study that in the marketplace and you build it out, but you do it in a very disciplined way, knowing that it's not going to be sustained forever in terms of, again, release after release after release, just adding new functionality. It's very much focused on value. Multimodal. The multimodal world, again, so complicated. As I've talked to people who are so excited about this, that we finally have all of this that's going on for us now, and haptic interfaces, and voice input and output, and the use of motion to control a device, and so on and so forth. And I'm sitting here going, it is exciting. It is exciting. But there's no doubt in my mind that most of us are going to create a big mess. Now, there are people who are doing it well. But all I have to do is remind you folks is that we had 20 years or so to get the graphical user interface right, and we still haven't mastered that, okay? And that's the easiest of them all. And now when we add all of these other modes of interaction in there, it's going to be very hard to disentangle them when there's a problem. Is it this, or is it that, or is it a combination of the two of them? It's going to be very, very hard to figure out problems when it goes wrong. So it's exciting, and I think there's never been a more exciting time in interaction design, but it comes with tremendous risk. And again, there's a tremendous burden that's placed on us to understand, when this form of interaction supports an activity more effectively than another in terms of the use environment, reducing cognitive load, or whatever the case happens to be, but being able to build the case, not just using it for the sake of using it. Now, the last one is a threat. So, we're talking a lot about opportunities. There's always threats. And as I said, the threat is the competitive landscape. So as our value in the organization has increased, people are not going to let us have it all to ourselves. And now, and this has happened in just the last, I would say, year or so in doing these interviews. I'd say, okay, what are you looking for? I used to thought, what are you looking for in a UX professional? And then I begin to break it out a little bit more into some of the sub-disciplines. And what I hear increasingly, they're saying like, well, we're trying to get away from hiring UX professionals. And I go, what do you mean? You have any bad experience? They said, no. It's so important in the organization that we're now committed to the fact that it's everybody's job. So what does it mean when it becomes everybody's job?
Nobody
It's nobody's job. No, so on the one hand, I think we can be cynical, but on the other hand, I think actually it is good. And I look at it, in the graduate program here, as I look at the graduate profile where, again, we're drawing in about 20% from engineering, about 20% from design. I have a very small percentage of about 5 to 6 students a year who are getting the human factors degree and an MBA, so they're going to go out into management roles. I think that's a good thing. I want to put UX people in development. I want to put UX people in the design world. I want to put UX people in the top offices in the organization. That's how we are going to make it work. There's always going to be a need for a UX specialist, okay, no doubt about it. But again, it's also a benefit to us in order to facilitate what we need to do to have people in the right places who understand, who aren't fighting us, okay? And I think, again, that's a big change that we see going on out there, is that we're seeing wider acceptance across the organization. My dream, I'm just going to share my dream with you because I got you here. But my goal, and I'm beginning to see it now, I'm glad to see, you're hiring director level positions. I'm watching, just 10 years out of the program, people moving into VP positions, okay? Early graduates of the program that are actually becoming vice presidents of user experience and customer experience, that are coming in at directors levels, that are moving into product management. And again, not to offend any engineer in the room here, but product management has been dominated by the engineering field for a long time. And I think that was right back in the 80s and the 90s, but I think as you move into this new tech world, I think there's at least room for a few UX people in product management roles. And I'm seeing more of that happening. And I think that's terribly exciting, and that's a big change that we're seeing in the field. So again, I can move through these things quickly, but again, this notion of the greatest value that you can deliver to your organization as an HCI professional, and I think we need to say this, and we need to demonstrate this and communicate this, is increase the probability of success. Do not accept the fact that you have to turn a product out in the marketplace that's going to embarrass you. I wouldn't say it has to be perfect. I buy into the lean startup concept. I believe some companies wait too long and lose a competitive advantage, but it doesn't have to be embarrassing. If you have a UX person on the team, they can help to avoid the major embarrassments. You can still get out there and wow them with the innovation and the technology, but you can deliver it in a cleaner format, okay, in a presentation format and experience. So we can increase the probability of success. We can put your design and development team in a productive space. I do find in these really fast-moving companies way too much A/B testing going on. Not that I have a problem with A/B testing. I think it's a wonderful thing. But I wish they were testing 2 good products, okay? A lot of times they just find out one is better than the other, but they're both lousy, okay? We need to put them in a place where they're testing 2 really good designs. And our expertise has said everything we can in terms of saying they're 2 good designs. Now let's test them and find which one should be released. Okay? Let's get them to that place. And I think we see this a lot. Now, this is coming from the lean startup concept, but it's the notion of getting that product out there into the marketplace and then learning from it. And I love what he's saying here. I love what he's saying here. And I think about, geez, do we have a place at this table? I believe we do. I believe we can be the one that's studying this. I don't think that's who he envisions, but I think we can be there. When I see this, I go, I want a piece of that seat at that table. I want to be there. We can deliver honest value here. And again, we have to be able to deliver. So, here's one of the, I guess, surprising and not so surprising findings of my studies. So we go through all of this, and even that wonderful person, who has all of these wonderful skill sets and development skills, and actually can do some visual design as well. They say, I hire a person like that, and more often than not, they fail and they don't work out and they leave, or we let them go. And what you find at the end of the day, there's a lot of talented people out there. But in terms of successful people are differentiated by these soft skills. And this is what they're looking for. Okay, this is what they're looking for in people. And again, you don't learn this in the classroom. Some of this stuff, to a certain degree, you're born with it. You can only develop it so much, but recognize if you have a weakness and try to enhance it, try to improve it. But this is a reduction. I think I had about 20 pages of notes around soft skills. And I wasn't even asking a question. Can you tell me about the soft skills you're looking for? I was just asking what qualities you're looking for. And I was really expecting, again, a lot of knowledge and classes and tools and design skills. And I was expecting all of that kind of stuff. And I ended up leaving every interview with long lists. Strong communication skills. Okay? The ability to speak, the ability to write, the ability to present, okay? And to do it concisely and to do it in a powerful way, based on evidence and not opinion. Influencing skills, something that I heard all the time, and I think we all know this, is that we can collect the most wonderful data in the world from studies, in the field or in the lab. But if we don't know how to communicate that data to influence people in the organization, particularly higher ups in the organization, we have failed, okay? Data is only good if we can bring it to action. And then we have to convince the people that can make that happen, influencing skills. The notion of ideation, the ability to take ideas and represent them. And again, you see this so much, and again, we talk a lot about prototyping, that you need to know these prototyping skills and things like that. And they would say that, yeah, we expect everybody to have that. But they said, what I really want is somebody that can stand up in a meeting where we're debating a design and a design solution, and somebody that stands up and just grabs that marker and starts going wild on the whiteboard. That's what I want, okay? And they're rare. They're rare. Somebody who has the confidence to do that, somebody who can take and capture that conversation and frame it. And if you're framing the conversation, you're controlling the conversation, okay? So it's a very powerful skill to have. Meeting management, we all know that, bad, ineffective, inefficient meetings. The ability to distinguish the important from the unimportant, okay? And again, it kind of goes with the next one, is to know when to walk away. I think a lot of us, again, we're just passionate about what we do, okay? And I think you can see down here, passion's so important. And because of that, we all love what we do, and we're passionate about it, and we go crazy sometimes. And we need to know what's worth fighting for, and what we should just let go. Yeah, I'm right, but you know what? It's not worth fighting for. I'm going to save that for another day, for something that is significant. And they're looking for that in people. And they just see us as people who fight for everything, regardless of its severity or its significance. So it's actually a quality that they're looking for to distinguish successful people. Know when to stop selling. Know when you've convinced people. Again, they'll talk about, again, I'll get people with very good influencing skills, and then they just don't shut up. And they don't know when they've sold them. And they end up turning people off at the end. Know when you're sold, and walk away. Okay? These again are soft skills that, do you learn this in a class? I guess maybe you get feedback in presentations, but these are things that you have to be thinking for. These are qualities they're looking for. Knowledge of the business as well as the user. We cannot just kind of have this blind pursuit of user advocacy. We have to be sensitive to the business goals. And if it's a profit-making business, we have to think about what we're doing and how it affects profitability. And again, I think, again, a lot of my students here know this, is that we frame everything in that sort of business case. And it's a very, very important skill, is to be able to go in, and sometimes to even know to go in, that you're going in and you're presenting evidence to suggest that this is greatly going to improve human performance or reduce errors or improve the quality of the emotional experience, but that you may be more effective going in and framing it and aligning it with a business goal. And to know when to do one or the other, or a combination of the two. You need to be a relationship builder. You guys, I heard this over and over again, and whenever I heard this, I always thought of our good friend Joe Dumas, that a lot of you know. Joe, we always talked about this, when he taught here, is, it's all about the relationship. Is, don't wait until go out and meet the people in development or people in marketing when you've got a problem. That should be part of your job. Once a week you should be going out and having lunch with somebody in the organization. And not talking about all the wonderful things that you do, but trying to understand what they do and what drives them and what motivates them and what challenges they face. Because when you can see some of the work that you're doing where it feeds into and satisfies some of their needs, you're going to have an ally within the organization. And then when a problem does come up, you're going to find that the relationship is going to come up back in a positive way. They want product passion. And I'll be honest with you, this in the parentheses is my own. I want to see passion. You know, people will come to my office. I probably have 5 prospective students come in my office a week, and they all want to know, like, geez, what do I need to get into the program? What do I have? I say, I have one litmus test, and I already know whether you have it or not. Okay, so don't worry about it. Do you have passion? Do you have passion for the field? This is not a field that people just wander into, and I think you all know this. I know most of the people in the room here, and you're all passionate about this. It's not just a field that you wander into saying, geez, I'm looking for a career opportunity. This sort of seems nice. It was accounting or user experience. Now, it wasn't that kind of decision. You knew you wanted to do this, and you knew you wanted that. When people come in my office and say, you know, I've always been bothered by this, and I've always wanted to make people's lives better, and this pain and suffering is unnecessary. You know, when I hear this early in the conversation, this is the person I want, and this is the person that's going to be successful. And then you take that to a product when you're working to a company that you fall in love with that product, okay? And you want it to be the best product that you can be. You can't fake this. You may be able to fake it for a while, but you can't fake it forever. It eventually will show through. So this is where I'll sort of wrap it up. And this comes back, Jeffrey, to your point here. So this is the great challenge that I face because, you know, with like 110 students in the program here at any point in time, you know, and people are always out there looking at job ads. And I just did this, you know, last week just to kind of update. Go out to like Simply Hired in the Bay Area and look for UX jobs. Last week there were over 700 jobs available. And I'll be honest, I didn't do all 700. I did about 300 of them. You would never know they were talking about the same field. And this is terribly confusing for anybody who's looking for jobs right now, or for anybody who's thinking about, okay, you know, what kind of educational program or experience should I be looking for? Or even when you come into a program like this, you know, how do I manage my way through this program so I'm marketable on the other side? It's not easy. It's not easy for you. It's not easy for me. It's not easy for the other faculty in the program. Because it's a lot of different things. But we just can't say it's everything. So, you know, what you have to do is you have to make decisions. And I'm not quite done with this, and I'm still tweaking this. But as I've looked at all of my interviews, and I've been looking at these hundreds and hundreds of job descriptions, you know, I'm kind of breaking it out into, if you want to call it, 3 tracks. And that there's a core experience. The good thing is there's a core experience in all of these. And these are things that are going to be familiar to those of you, know, who've been in the field of HCI. You know, understanding HCI, human factors principles. This is how we separate ourselves from the people who just kind of walk in off the street and define themselves as a user experience person. Is that deep study of people, that intimate knowledge of people as it relates to interaction design and the emotional experience in those areas. Understanding how we take that into practice in terms of interaction design. Understanding the research methods, and, you know, notice how this is tying back to knowledge, evidence, insights. You'll see that it does connect. And then this notion of ideation. We all need to be able to communicate and represent. These, I think, are the core principles and competencies, I should say, that you need to have as a professional in the field. And then what you need to decide is how you're going to focus. And so what I see is, in my research, is I see 3 dominant tracks, and actually 2 dominant tracks. User experience design and user experience research, okay? And so the user experience design works on that same foundation, but you add in things like prototyping, visual design, and even evaluation. They're looking for this. They are looking that you can do, again, begin to build the design out and do some formative testing and summative testing and so on and so forth. They want to see that you're able to do that. Now, what's tricky here is you don't just walk in off the street and say, okay, I want to be a visual designer. People who pursue this track, and it's about 20% of the people who come into the program are coming from RISD. They're coming from Savannah College of Art. They're coming from industrial design programs. They've spent 4 or 5 years in the studio before they come here to learn about HCI. You're not going to learn that in a single course. Now, you can learn the ideation and the representation and so on and so forth. You can learn that in a course and experiences in different courses. But you're not going to compete at that high-end design level And what you need to understand is these high-end designers, they don't hire a lot of them. What I heard in most of the companies that I've been in is one high-end visual designer will support probably 7 or 8 interaction designers, okay? So if you want to go where the jobs are, just kind of the more general interaction design is the way to go. Now, where we see a tremendous amount of growth is in the second area is user experience research. Because again, we're moving towards doing it up front, and this is what we've been fighting for 25 years, folks. We've always said we could do this better, rather than fixing it after the fact, if we have the right information going into product development. And we're here. Not everybody's at the same place, but we're almost here, okay? And many companies are there. But this notion of doing the research, and again, building on that same foundation, here's where you have to have a complete research tool set. You know, you have to have the quantitative, you have to have the qualitative. You know, 5 years ago, I never heard an employer ask about, geez, do you have people who have ethnography skills? We're actually offering a full semester-long ethnography course now. And employees love it. You know, ethnography when I was in grad school used to always be the joke, okay? I actually took an ethnography course in my PhD program, and it was a blast. I enjoyed it. I loved field research more than anything else. But you could never find employment in it, okay? You can today. And it's something that's a value, because it provides an intimate understanding of your users that you can't get any other way, okay? So again, we see there again, and then again, evaluation, formative, summative, competitive benchmark testing, understanding how to do that, experimental research design for the A/B testing, knowing how to do that, but building on that there. This is where the growth area is. This is, again, I think where the value lies, and I'll be honest with you, this is my personal opinion. It's kind of guided me for the last 27 years is follow the value, okay? Follow the value. And with the value comes appropriate compensation, appropriate recognition, and stability. This is not a job that's going anywhere. It's not going to be outsourced, and it's likely in the progressive companies not even to be contracted out, okay? Because they see it as so central and core to what they do. Now, Jeffrey, to your point, the user experience super hybrid, also known in the industry as the unicorn. People have claimed to have seen them, and they do exist. I'll be honest with you, and you're all going to wonder who they are. I would estimate I bring in 3 or 4 of them a year into the program, okay? And these are people who come out of RISD, Savannah College of Art, Mass College of Art even. They've gone off and they've taken a development certificate at WPI, okay? So they come in with highly developed visual skills, 4 or 5 years in a studio. They have technical chops, and now they're getting the HCI. They are a total package. Now, it's hard to do that retroactively because, you know, it's that design part. You can go back and supplement the technical to a certain degree. The design, first of all, you know, I think you're born with it to a certain degree. Many of you know my background. I came out of design, and I taught design for years at the University of Maryland. And I wasn't a very good one, so I wasn't born that way. But I think the good designers that I worked with in the studio, they were born that way. They think differently. They're wired differently. So education and training is only going to take you so far. I think we can get you to ideation and early design, representation, and prototyping. I think we can get you there. And again, we hear a lot of talk in the field today is, again, where companies are hiring one high-end visual designer who's creating pattern libraries. And then the term that I hear all the time now is then we hire a whole bunch of pixel pushers. Not the job I want, okay? Not the job I want. I don't want to be pushing around pixels all day long according to somebody's prescribed design pattern library. Not a terribly creative. I think when we think of visual design, we all think of the sexy high-end creative. There's only a little bit of that going on out there, okay? And then there's a lot of pixel pushing going on in the field. And I hear that a lot, is that, again, a lot of the work is being done by this. These people are in big demand in the most progressive companies, and they pay big money. Okay, these jobs are paying, you know, somebody with that skill set in the Valley right now, $175,000 to $200,000 without trying. Okay, But they're in short supply, and it's not like we can supply and meet the demand, okay? We also see, though, another variation of this in the data, is there's a less experienced, okay, so here I'm talking about the high end. There's a less experienced version of this that we see in startups where they want one person that can do it all, but they're not looking for the high-end skills. And even for companies, that are, again, going through tough economic times that are laying off, 4 different, specializations, and they want to hire one person to replace them. And then they don't know enough about it and they're satisfied with getting something less. So there is that version, that less experienced version of that as well. Your reaction to that? I'm curious how you respond to that in terms of that depiction of the field. Go.
I don't even know how to say this, but
Yep.
it's something I've been struggling with. So many
You're not alone.
the names that we/people call themselves, in this field, for lack of a better word, it gets sliced and diced so many different ways, with, information designer, UX designer.
Yeah, I know the whole list, yeah.
Information architect, and I mean, you can go on and on with these titles or names, and people mean very different, usability engineer or whatever. People mean different things by them, even people who do these jobs, and so I don't really understand how hiring managers have any clue what to even ask for, or what they're getting with these different things. I mean, you're talking about big buckets, but there's a lot of...
Oh yeah, and in all of this, please, this is a visualization here. All of these things can be spelled out. I think you have to be, I think we have to bring it to a level of specificity. I agree with you 100%. I probably help 50, 60, and I hope I'm not going to increase my business here because I just do it as a service to the field. Probably about 50, 60 companies a year write job descriptions, where they'll send me a job description they want posted, and I said, you can't post this. I said, let me rewrite it. But then I always get to then tell them what the salary is as well, so it works out for my students. So, that's the one favor they have to give me in return. But they don't know how to do this. Absolutely, they don't. And you're right, and I've resisted doing this because I don't like tracking, and so I recognize there's a lot of flexibility to move around in here, but I think we need to begin looking at paths just for the reason that you've described. And I think there's a tremendous risk to our field that there are people, and I don't mean this in an offensive way to offend anybody, because people who are trying to make a living and get a job and compete, I give you all the credit in the world. But again, there are a lot of people that are coming into our field that don't have the appropriate preparation, but are calling themselves by these names. And in the final analysis, we all remember what happened in the late 1990s, didn't we? Is that people were hiring highly paid people who were not qualified. And that came back to bite us big time. And so we have to be a little protective and defensive of our profession. And that's the only reason I'm beginning to put some definition to this. And also to help, kind of guide and manage people when they're coming in for a career advice. Yeah. But I agree with this. It's a major challenge that we face. I think there's some good in that, and that there's some flexibility and room to maneuver. But I think if we're going to be successful as a profession, we need to define ourselves. Successful professions can always bring some level of definition to what they do. And what are the qualifications, or what are the credentials? We can't even agree, if certification is appropriate and things like that. There has to be some kind of certification or some kind of credential. Let's decide what it is. And different professions do it in different ways. And there's a reason why they do that, and we're not willing to do that. Yeah.
Where would you put user experience copywriters in this?
Oh, very good, and another oversight. You guys are just embarrassing me. I should have mentioned that more. This is another thing, and I didn't put it in here in this presentation, but it's definitely in the data, and some of you are going to be just so thrilled to hear this. You know what's coming back? Content. I haven't heard anybody talk about content except for making it go away for the last 10 or 15 years. And everybody's talking about content. And good content, and there's consultants out there making a fortune right now, helping people write good, and I will use the word clever, content. Yeah, it's in there. I'm not quite sure because we're not handling it right now in the program. We handle it from a communication skill perspective, but not in terms of generating content. But that's a very good point. Content's coming back. Yay. Anybody else? Okay, let me just finish up here. And so, in managing your career, for what it's worth, this is the advice that I give people as you're kind of sorting through all of this, is first and foremost, follow what makes you happy. We are very, very lucky to work in a field where you can do something that you love, that's rewarding and challenging and professional, and you can see the results of your actions and that you've improved people's lives, not every day and not for every one of you to the same degree and depending on where you're working. But we're doing things that we love, and we are passionate about that. And you know what? We're being paid well to do that. I think you look at the salaries in our field compared to what else is going on in this economy, we're doing all right. We're doing all right. So follow what makes you happy. Don't go into a field. So people say, should I work, I'm not going to name companies. Should I go to work for that company? I say, well, you're going to be happy in that culture? Think about it very carefully. Think about the people you're working with every day that you're having lunch with. If that makes you happy, good. But follow what's going to make you happy. Monitor the market. Know what's going on. Know what's hot out there right now. Again, if I were, I'm not sure I'd want to be 24 again, but if I were 24 again, I'd be thinking seriously about real deep movement in the mobile user experience, okay? Because these are the people making the most money and the greatest demand, okay? But think about what's going on out there in the marketplace. Play to your strengths and be honest with yourself. Some of you are more creative, and I mean this universally. Some of you are more creative than others. And if you've never picked up a crayon in your life, don't go into user experience design. Because you're going to be competing with people that are just going to crew you, that do have the proper skill set and natural talent. So play to your strengths. If your strengths are analytical, then you want to go into the research side of it. I love it when I got a student who comes in and says, you know what, I really love stats. You don't hear that very often. But every once in a while you hear that and I say, I know a company for you. Because they can't find people who are able to go in and handle the user experience analytics. Okay?
The person who was weighing accounting.
Yeah, yes. I do find them, and I listen very carefully because I hear these little special things. I say, okay, I'm going to watch you in a year. I know where I'm going to put you. Race specialist versus generalist. And again, this is a tough one. Generalists have more flexibility, a little bit more nimble when the economy goes down, are a little bit more employable because there's a greater range of opportunities, but generally the compensation is not as great. Okay? So you have to weigh that against specialization and deep specialization, which is better in a strong economy, smaller number of opportunities, but you're heavily compensated for that skill set because there's less competition. There's no right answer. There's no right answer. And you can now take a look at my 3 paths, and you can do generalist and you can do deep specialization in each of those areas in different ways. So this is where you start to combine those things, and then you can take each of those paths and go into different industries as well, which is something that's on the list here somewhere, industry and culture. And this is how you start to manage your career. It's pulling all those pieces together. What are your strengths? What makes you happy? Research, design, which industry, what kind of culture? You begin to put it together and you say, okay, now it begins to make sense. And I'm not looking at those 700 jobs on Simply Hired and getting confused and overwhelmed and feeling inferior. But I'm now focusing in on 20 that are perfect for me. And that's what you need to do. And then again, startup versus a mature organization. Very, very different role for an HCI UX person, okay, in those different kind of companies. I always regret, I never did. I consulted with startups, but I never worked in a startup. If I have a regret, that's one, okay? I've never, worked in a startup. I think that would be just a blast, okay? So, and I'm going back. If I was 24 again, I'd work in a mobile startup, okay? So again, But you can see again where again, that just would be an exciting experience to have. I can tell you the most progressive firms that I interviewed, they want people who have been part of a startup. And they want you to be able to talk about your successes, and even more importantly, they want you to be able to talk about your failures, and what you learned from those failures. Because that's critical, and they're looking for that. They will not touch you in some of these very progressive startups and internet companies unless you've been part of that culture in the past. They really feel their world is so unique. Don't necessarily agree with it completely, but I can see part of it. So again, their internet services, IT, this has been a big change in the field. Again, I can only speak for my program. About 40% of my students leave this program and they go to work in IT. That is unheard of. I talk to other HCI programs around the country, they're saying, IT? They don't even know what it is, okay? But it's 40% of the jobs coming out of these programs, and they are high-paying jobs with wonderful companies, okay? But again, that's just a whole untapped market. Location, where do you want to be? Consulting, do you want to try that? Healthcare, or traditional tech. There's nothing wrong with traditional tech. I'm not trying to make a case for the new tech. Traditional tech is still great. They need us desperately, okay? But you have to decide where you want to be in that world. And you guys have been very patient. I see the future as just being incredibly bright. Every once in a while, I think that the nice thing about this field is every time I get bored, something comes along and just turns it upside down. And it's like starting all over again as a little kid. And there's this constant renewal in the field. And I think that's what does keep it terribly exciting. I think our future is exciting and unimaginable. New challenges. It's not all going to be easy, but I love the challenge. That's what keeps it interesting, is dealing with the challenge, dealing with the unknown, and figuring it out and making it better, and opportunities. And I really think the opportunities are unlimited for us. Okay, so I'll close out here. Happy to hang around and chat. I want to make sure people can feel free to leave and go home, but I'm happy to hang around and chat and just answer questions and discuss and debate. Thank you very much.